Okay, wonderful. And can I, one more confirmation, because I've lost my green outline of the slides. So do you still see the slides? Just a thumbs up would be appreciated. Okay, wonderful.
I just see the one slide, yeah.
Great. So welcome everyone to our, what we've been doing as quarterly Mentorship Minute webinar series. We are recording this session so that we can post this to our Informs Mass YouTube site shortly. I'm your moderator, Sean Doheny. I'm the Chief Analytics Officer for JD-SAT and on the council for the Informs Military and Security Society as a industry representative. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple admin notes and then I'll hand over the reins to the president of the society and then to our speaker. And we are very excited to have panelists joining us at the end of the session as well to help facilitate the conversation. So I want to encourage everyone to connect with us on these handles. So we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and I mentioned our YouTube page. So if you enjoyed today's webinar, please let us know. If you have any suggestions for further webinars, let us know that too. We'd love to hear from you and connect with you so that we can continue to give back to the larger military and security, national security, ops research and analytics communities. As I mentioned, this session is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube page so that you can go back if you missed it, something, or you can share it with others if you think that would be helpful to them. We plan to post these slides there as well and on our Informs Connect page. So if you're an Informs member. A couple, as we're getting used to being remote in almost everything we're doing now, just a couple reminders on how to participate and interact. As from the guests, you should see panel here, the animation. If you click on the lower, hover above or below the Zoom page, this highlights and opens the audio settings. So if you're having any trouble with the audio settings, I know I have a wired headset and a wireless headset, and I kind of have to go in from time to time and figure out which one I'm there. This is where you would change those settings. These next highlights there should be a raise your hand function. So if you'd like to contribute to the conversation, we'd encourage you to do that. So just click on the raise your hand, and I'll see that on my screen and be able to unmute our participants so that you can participate in the conversations as well. We'll see a question Q&A section there. So if you click on there, a chat window will open up and you'll be able to chat either with privately to me or the panelists, or to the rest of the group as well. And if you have questions for our panelists, I'll be monitoring the chat. And so please feel free to put your questions in there. And like I said, you can raise your hand and I can take you off of mute. So we definitely want to keep this as interactive as possible. So please take advantage of those features, and I will do my best as your moderator to make sure that we keep this as interactive as possible. So without further ado, next I'd like to introduce Dr. Natalie Scala. Dr. Scala is the president of the Military and Security Society and an associate professor and graduate program director at Towson University in the Business Analytics and Technology Management Department. So I'll turn over the reins to her to say a few words about our society and then to introduce our first speaker. Over to you, Dr. Scala.
All right, thanks, Sean. So it is good to see everyone today. Thanks for joining our webinar. So I just want to give you a little bit of background about what Military and Security Society, or MASS, is at Informs if you're not familiar with us. And if you are familiar with us, get a little bit of an update on all the new things that we have happening here. So here is our website through Informs Connect if you want to learn more about the initiatives that we have. But overall, MASS seeks to foster development, dissemination, and implementation of knowledge we look for practitioners as well as academics, as well as graduate students and undergraduate students who are working in the military and security space. So that is very broadly defined. A few years ago, we changed our name to Military and Security, but before that, we were known as the Military Application Society. So everybody knew what Military Application Society was. It was for most of us who were working on military logistics, military workforce planning, assessments, all those traditional type of military problems, whether you had previously served in the armed forces anywhere in the world or you were just an academic working in that area. We have broadened that. So we're still a home for all of those military-based folks, but we also want to take a look at other types of national security type questions, right? So that could be things like cybersecurity, policing, and we can even look into security problems in a sense of things like climate change, pandemics, what are those national security implications and what are those general public security applications or implications of these types of problems as well. So we have broadened our focus, but not broadened it so much that it's just a catch-all collector. We're still focused on security and keeping people safe and military type applications and national security policy and all of those great things. So again, we typically have a lot of academics in our group. We also have a lot of people in our society who have previously served. And since Informs is an international organization, we welcome those who are from any country. We're not just limited to that US population like you see in some other professional societies as well. And we just have a different focus and a different scope. So what's nice also about Informs Mass is that people like myself who have never served in the military but have a lot of experience working on military related problems and working in the national security space through both research and consulting, there is a home for everyone here as well. So we're really excited to host people who are interested in early career type networking as in kind of the focus for this panel today, as well as those of you who may have not attended this panel live and are just watching it on YouTube later. So check out what we're up to. We have a lot of webinars. We have a very large presence at the Informs annual meeting, and we are also open to hearing about what you need and how we can better serve you as well. We'll go to the next slide, please. So a lot of the joining benefits and participating actively once you do join is that we do have a very large network of professionals. And what's nice about the Mass community is that there is a pretty large population of those who have had military service and are transitioning back into civilian type roles, whether that is in academia or that is in a practitioner space as well. Even for us who have not served previously in the military, we have also connections with those who are active and, we also retired or separated from their service as well and completed their service. So we have a great, strong network. And you may be able to meet people right away that can help you network, or we may be able to connect you with people in your area as well. But we have practitioners, researchers, graduate students, as well, like I mentioned, even as undergraduates interested in research as well. I think the network was, for me personally, the biggest benefit ever. When I graduated out of graduate school, I went to the University of Pittsburgh for my PhD. I interned at RAND on Project Air Force while I was in my PhD program. I came out of that. I was working in the Department of Defense for the United States, and I started getting involved in the Informs Mass community, as well as the Informs communities, the local communities in the DC, DMV, District, Maryland, Virginia area. And the network has always been the most important benefit for me and the greatest benefit for me from Informs. I found my DoD job, my first job out of graduate school, through Informs. And then when I transitioned into academia at Towson, I found my Towson job through the Informs Career Network. So every sort of major career milestone that I have had, I've been able to connect to a relationship I had through Informs, or a relationship that Informs was able to promote and foster for me as well. So joining, I think the network is the biggest benefit from it, but also being able to attend our meetings and also our webinars and connect with us on our social media and our Connect spaces, our Informs Connect website. There is a lot of domain knowledge being shared there as well. You'll be able to learn about new techniques, new tools, new books out in the area. We can also able to recognize you for the different types of career advantages or milestones that you have. We have awards, formalized awards through the Mass community, but we also have a way to just promote great things that are happening within the members of our organization. Next slide, please. Okay, and I'll pass it over to Brian Morgan, who is the council member for, one of our council members for the Military and Security Society.
Oh,
And before
no,
I
I
pass
think
it
we
to,
might have lost Natalie, or it might just be my apologies if it's my network.
I can hear Sean. Can others
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Dr. Scala.
Okay, great.
My apologies, Natalie. Yeah.
That's fine. So I'm going to pass it to Brian soon in a second, but I do also want to point out before I do that, Brian is the president-elect of Military Operations Research Society. That is more of a U.S. professional organization. He is also a council member for Military and Security Society. The Military and Security Society is about to hold elections this summer for our next round of council members and leaders. So if you are interested in that, please, drop me a note as well. If you would like to reach me after the webinar directly, my email is nscala, N-S-C-A-L-A, @towson.edu, and Towson is spelled T-O-W-S-O-N. If that's a little hard to remember, you can also find me by just emailing supply chain, just as one word, supplychain@towson.edu as well. My grad students monitor that account, but they will definitely make sure I get that message. All right, thanks, and I'll let Brian take it up from here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Scala. And so today's talk on mentoring for the early career professional was born out of the previous Mass Mentoring Minute, where Lieutenant Commander Matt Powers talked about Moore's Education and Professional Development Colloquium, and then Sean talked about career transitioning from active duty military service to the private sector that he had recently done. And then there was some discussion that we haven't really talked about what is mentoring and how does that early career professional get started developing their professional network and kind of break that barrier, get over the hump for a mentoring relationship. And before we begin, I'd just like to thank Sean for coordinating this, and then also welcome both Shannon and Dan, who I understand are working on a mentoring program for their company, JD Sat. And so let's go to the next slide. By way of introduction, undergraduate degree from University of Virginia, commissioned through the Navy ROTC unit there, 30-year career as a Navy officer. And while on active duty, I was able to come to the Naval Postgraduate School in residence for a master's degree in operations research. I've applied the degree for a little over 6 years doing analysis for the Navy's headquarters staff in the Pentagon. My final assignment in the Navy was as a military faculty member here at the Naval Postgraduate School. And I maintain an affiliation with the department. And as Natalie pointed out, my professional affiliations for the Military Operations Research Society and also Informs Mass. Next slide. Okay, so what we'll talk about is the practical aspects of establishing a mentor-mentee relationship, although along the way we will talk about some of the characteristics and more of an academic approach to the mentor-mentee relationship. And as the title of the presentation suggests, that we are going to focus on the mentee, but clearly as the mentee you still need to understand kind of what qualities you would want in your mentor, and again, this is kind of that practical how-to applied look at the mentor-mentee relationship. And we'll pause at certain times in the presentations, and we can, if we need to anchor on a particular point, and also we'll be mindful of the time to allow about 20 minutes or so for an open discussion after my presentation. So you may wish to hold your question or comment for the panel discussion. Next slide. We'll start with a high-level look at professional development in general, and I'll start the discussion with career mentor that you can kind of see at the 12 o'clock position on the diagram, where that career mentor is going to provide advice, considerations, and goals for the mentee. Other aspects of professional development, kind of in a clockwise direction, knowledge from experienced junior personnel. And so you're going to gain wisdoms from their years of facing similar situations. In a military environment, this would be that graduate from an academy or an ROTC unit who is commissioned as an ensign in the Navy or second lieutenant in all of the other services, and suddenly you are now senior to all of the non-commissioned officers and other senior enlisted personnel in the service. Well, they have a ton of experience, and in some cases they may be twice your age. The analogy in a company or a private firm would be, if you join maybe on the management track directly out of a master's or a PhD program, and you have somebody working in a lab or some other part of the division that you're running, that they have many more years of experience in the company, and you would be wise to learn from that experience. Now, an example of a movie that you can watch that depicts knowledge gained from experienced junior personnel. I think we're probably all fans of Clint Eastwood. And if you go back to a movie in the late 1980s called Heartbreak Ridge, Clint Eastwood plays a character known as Gunnery Sergeant Highway, and he's challenged with both the professional development of his platoon members, but then from this knowledge gained from junior personnel, his platoon commander goes through a transformation. And so it's interesting to watch those two dynamics going on. I will tell you that the movie is not intellectually challenging. It's a good Saturday night movie with popcorn, as it's a little bit over the top, but it's a good example of this aspect of professional development. Peer group discussions might be what you did in school as study groups or other similar activities, and so you're going to gain insights from kind of shared experiences and awarenesses. Continuing to formal training and operational OJT, on-the-job training, that's essentially your procedures, orders, and how your platform and systems work, what your employment policies are. So that's essentially how you do your job, and clearly throughout your career that that type of training advances. Lastly, we have guidance from your evaluating senior, and that's the person that's going to do the evaluation of your performance. And usually in that setting, there's going to be some discussion on where you see yourself going, and the senior providing his or her advice to you. And I will say, as we'll see later in the brief, that many military officers would call guidance from evaluating senior as their mentoring. But I would like to draw a distinction from that. And so this view of career mentoring is a little bit narrower maybe than most definitions. Next slide. So then how do you start to develop a mentor-mentee relationship? And I would say that an ideal avenue of doing so is active participate in a professional society. And you can see all of the benefits that that society provides, and also as an early career professional or even as a student, many of the organizations have student membership rates which are, on an annual basis, in the $30s to $40 ranges. So it's very affordable, and we'll see throughout this brief why a professional society has some ideal characteristics for gaining and developing a mentor-mentee relationship. I'll also mention the professional societies have local chapters. So in the case of Informs, there's a Washington, D.C. chapter called WinForms, and again, that might, you could start there at the local level, and certainly there are a lot of career professionals in the national security field. They're in the Washington, D.C. Area. And then kind of some other opportunities that, that may avail themselves to you would be your company or organization. And we have, again, Dan and Shannon, and they can talk about the program that they're trying to develop for their organization. And then closely related to a professional society would be attendance at a professional lecture series. And so it may not be, a particular society, but an organization brings in a diverse group of speakers. There may be a speaker that you're particularly interested in, and you may be able to meet like-minded professionals. And so what I'd like to do here is I'll pause for a second, and Sean, if we could open up the discussion real quickly for others to mention any other avenues that they're aware of that can help kind of kickstart that mentor-mentee relationship.
Absolutely, Brian. And for those on the panel, you're able to take yourself off mute anytime. And I think this is actually a great opportunity to introduce some of our panelists as well. So as Brian mentioned, Shannon Dietrich is one of the program managers at JD-SAT. And she is a systems engineer by education and is the staff sponsor for a mentorship program as we're initiating a mentorship program in the company. And Dan Wozniak is, in addition to being a Marine, former Marine mortarman, is one of the senior data analysts at JD-SAT, assisting with that mentorship program. We're also joined by Harrison Schramm, as a senior fellow at CSBA, and a retired Navy officer, lieutenant, or excuse me, Harrison, retired commander, helicopter pilot, and great mentor of mine. So thank you all for joining the panel. Feel free to join in.
Sure. Sean, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, Shannon.
Okay.
Your camera is a little high though. So.
Okay, I know. I can't see. For some reason, I can't find. Is that better?
that is. Perfect.
Okay, I'm not seeing, for some reason I lost the vision of myself, but I don't need to see myself, so it's fine. And so, Brian, I also actually have my systems engineering degree from the University of Virginia. So I had to mention that since I saw you were also a UVA grad. Sean, is now a good time for me to just comment a little bit on the program we're starting at JDSAT?
Yeah, I think that'd be a great time. I think Brian, that was the question, right? Or the open opportunity.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we could maybe hold the particulars of JDSAT's
Okay.
program to the open discussion, but the question was, are there any other avenues that people could recommend for starting that mentor-mentee relationship? I think Harrison has his hand up. Go ahead, Harrison.
Brian, just a couple of things about mentorship writ large. Generally, people who are in mid to senior positions generally welcome the opportunity to serve as mentors, because we all owe somebody something and have a strong urge to pay it forward. If you come to me for a mentorship engagement, expect to leave with homework. And that homework might be something to develop yourself, or it might be an opportunity to participate in a professional activity through Informs or Moores. I would just like to say that one thing that professional societies provide is they cut across the barriers that we have in our careers, in the sense that when I was transitioning from the military, I knew a couple of vice presidents of Fortune 500 companies through Informs activities. These people would never have taken a cold call from me if I was just some guy on the street, but because we had served tangentially on a committee together, they were more inclined to take the call. So don't undervalue what you're doing when you're building your network.
Thank you. Okay, let's go ahead and continue, Sean. Okay, so we've already talked about the two professional societies that apply to the national security community. So I'll skip down to this third one, National Training and Simulation Association. And here's kind of a creative use of technologies for developing not necessarily a mentor-mentee relationship, but it can kind of help you start getting some mentorship. And that's through the use of natural language processing. And so think of, you know, if you're looking at a website and you have the frequently asked questions, you know, and you clicked on one of those frequent questions, it would, you know, the page would scroll down and you would look at what that answer is. Well, you can combine that with use of virtual humans. And so you would type in a mentoring question, and you would actually have a virtual human tell you that answer. And so this project that I was working on that was supposed to be presented at the ModSim World Conference next month was on that, where if you didn't have, you know, if you were a deployed military officer, and this was for a Navy organization asking for this, that you would click on the you know, enter your question, and a Navy officer would give you their take on your question. And so you know, we talked about Moores and Mass, but here's a kind of a novel or innovative approach of utilizing a couple of new technologies within the analytics environment to provide some mentoring when you don't have that opportunity because you are deployed. Okay, next slide. So getting started on the mentorship, I've listed 8 qualities of a good mentor, And certainly you can, list many, more terms than I've listed. Kind of maybe just to focus on one, perceptive, prior to our shelter in place and the social distancing, we very much value that in-person meeting, and you can help, kind of pick on some of those nonverbal communication aspects. And so, your mentor, would hopefully have, that good nonverbal communication and that understanding when you're interacting with them. Okay, next slide. And so the question is it possible to learn how to be a good mentor? And on a good note, the answer to that is yes. That it is possible to teach someone how to be a good mentor. And kind of during my career, I put very little credence in advice from someone who said, here is what I did. And the reason why I put little credence in that is that the rules often change. And so what worked in the past may not work today. And so, again, that's also part of, learning how to be, a good mentor of, instead of just talking about what you did, talk about the goals, talk about pathways to actually achieve those. Next slide. So here we have the mentor responsibilities of what he or should be providing to the mentee. And I'll add that there's an implicit responsibility to be accurate and truthful, but interestingly enough, I would argue that your mentor does not have to have a track record of personal success. And what I mean by that is that the mentor is providing things for the mentee to consider, to research, to think about. The mentee is responsible for that action. And so just so that the mentor, quote unquote, doesn't have this track record of success, that doesn't mean that the mentee will be somehow hindered, because the mentee is taking advantage of that mentor's knowledge from going before. And then one other aspect for mentor responsibilities that Harrison sort of touched on is that your mentor can help overcome obstacles, and that might be through that electronic introduction or an e-introduction email to kind of get the ball rolling in certain situations. Next slide. Just as it's important to know what the mentor should do, it's also important to know what the mentor should not do. Again, they're not going to dictate action. That's the responsibility of the mentee. They don't appraise the action, and the mentor should not provide a recommendation in that the mentee is responsible for the action, and if the mentor tells them what to do and somehow that fails or it doesn't come to fruition, the mentee may blame the mentor, and then that relation is going to be further inhibited. But that's not to say that the mentor couldn't elicit certain aspects of self-assessment from the mentee. You just have to be, again, a little bit careful there. Okay, mentees' responsibilities. Again, you know, it's your career. You've got to take responsibility, you know, for it. And certainly, if you have a meeting with your mentor and you have, you know, and you tell your mentor, I have no idea what I want to do, you know, well, you know, the mentor's not going to know what to do. You know, how do you focus that discussion? Again, the mentee has to be the active listener. Harrison talked about how he would give his mentee's homework, and then critically that the mentee has to maintain confidentiality within the mentoring relationship. We kind of put the burden on the mentee in this case because that mentor is probably dealing from a position with greater insight, greater knowledge of the environment, greater knowledge within the company. And again, if the mentee you know, speaks and attributes certain comments to that mentor, that could result in quite a few difficulties. Next slide. Here are the mentor relationships that the mentee should avoid. You can look at these, and they're all fairly understandable and make sense. The first two are with this, you know, there's an aspect of competition or going for those same professional goals. That's obviously not appropriate. And you know, if somebody's going to, you know, sit on a selection board or appraisal board or something where your performance is evaluated, again, you know, that's not appropriate. And then, you know, think critically regarding a mentor in the same organization or company. It's not to say you couldn't do it. You just have to be real careful with it. And as you look at these, recall that we previously talked about the professional societies and how they provide an ideal opportunity to establish a mentoring relationship. And you can see that those professional societies pretty much avoid all of these. And so that's why we find it so attractive. Next slide, Sean. So here's my thoughts on practical experience from my military career. And as I previously mentioned that, you know, most military officers will say that my first or second commanding officer really influenced my career decisions, and they would call that person, you know, their mentor. Again, I would argue that this guidance is not mentoring. It's an aspect of professional development. It's very important. It's very influential. It's not mentoring. And so probably in my 30-year career, I can honestly say I never had a mentor within the Navy. You may see organizations scheduling mentoring sessions, and again, I would probably better characterize those as guidance from a senior, and just kind of have that realization that you can't schedule the need for mentoring. And when I see these types of meetings, I kind of think about the notion of organizations scheduling time to innovate, where, you know, they say, oh, we're going to do an organizational offsite on, you know, next Tuesday, and we're going to innovate. Well, you know, that's not really how innovation occurs. You can't schedule it. And again, you know, scheduling mentoring sessions, is not overly effective. And again, if it's, your commanding officer or your, company's chief executive officer, that's not really mentoring. For the mentee, it's understandable that your needs are going to change over time as your career develops. And certainly, you can have several different mentors at the same time. And again, your mentors, again, may change over time. And so those are all completely understandable and, nothing odd or wrong there. And then Harrison mentioned that from the mentor standpoint, that once you've ridden the elevator to the top, send it back down. So as being a mentee, you have a mentor. You're going to advance in your career. You are going to then become a mentor and help your mentee with their career planning, their career decisions. And so again, help them ride the elevator to the top. Next slide. And so here's what we've talked about today, is that mentoring is one of 5 different avenues for professional development. We talked about why professional societies are an ideal manner for developing that mentor-mentee relationship. We also talked about how your company or organization may provide those. And we also talked about a professional lecture series may also provide an avenue for doing so. We talked about the mentor and mentee responsibilities. We talked about how that relationship may change over time. And most importantly, we talked about mentoring relationships that should be avoided. And with that, Sean, that concludes my presentation. And I think we have about 20 minutes left for panel questions and discussions. And I guess what we could do at this time is turn it over to Shannon and talk about what she was developing for JD-SAT.
That would be wonderful. And just as and Shannon, as you're coming off mute, and Dan, please feel free to join. If you have questions, just a friendly reminder, go ahead and put those in chat or raise the hand in Zoom, and I'll make sure that you have the ability to come off mute so you can join the conversation too. And I just want to once again thank our panelists for joining us today. Shannon?
Hi, so that was great. That was really good to hear. That was definitely some good content I know that we can take back to our team. The only additional comments I'll say before it's opened up to the panel or for questions is, I know at JD-SAT we looked at, there's lots of different things you can get out of a mentorship program, and that the identifying upfront what the objectives are. So there's the responsibility of the organization and the responsibility of the mentee to really identify, what am I trying to get out of this relationship, or what, from the company standpoint, what am I trying to get out of the program? And so it sounds like, I know the slides that Brian had really did show how there's different aspects of mentorship, like training, like peer feedback, like senior guidance. So that's what we've been working on, is really that setting up the objectives and really trying to define what we believe are, what our management wants to get out of a mentorship program and what the employees want to get out of the mentorship program. So that's what we found so far is really important to start with, is being really specific about, what the mentee is really seeking to get out of the relationship.
Hey, Sean, I have a saved round, if I may.
Of course, Brian, please.
Thanks. one aspect of a mentorship program to think about is if you subscribe to the notion that your mentor and mentee should not be within the same organization or company, the challenge becomes, how do you know if you have an effective mentoring program? Because as that organization, you only own half of the equation. You either have the mentee or you have the mentor. You shouldn't have both. And then we have this notion that there's a time aspect to this, that you may have a mentor-mentee relationship and you may only need guidance every year or so, every 6 months. It's a very fluid type of relationship, but it's really this notion that you potentially only own half of the equation.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting, really good point. And because everywhere you go, you want to be searching for that trusted advisor, whether we call it a mentor-mentee relationship. It's who do I trust to get unbiased and honest and independent feedback on what I should do next. And sometimes that could come from within the organization. I know as I was a brand new minted lieutenant, I needed to trust that company first sergeant, for example, for that good, honest feedback. But it's not necessarily what to your point, Brian, about that inside the organization, that mentor-mentee relationship in some of the ways we've defined it here. So how do you balance that within the company and the organization, finding that trusted advisor who can help provide that independent feedback? That's a great point.
Right, and see, I would argue that based upon your description of being that newly minted second lieutenant, see, I would not call that a mentoring relationship. That's where you are getting advice and guidance from a junior, that senior non-commissioned officer within your company, your platoon, or whatever that organization is. It's an aspect of professional development. It's incredibly invaluable, but it's not mentoring.
Interesting. Dan, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just talking about, if you're going to define a mentoring relationship, as something outside the organization, and I'll be honest, our program at JD Stat is likely to include mentors, which are, within our program. But obviously we're, a relatively small firm, and we're probably going to be looking outside for some of those relationships. I think an important part that's come up is that we really need to establish a way to monitor and evaluate those relationships. And so, to your point of, well, how do you know what's going on here? If you only have one side of the equation, I think it's the organization's responsibility to make sure, especially on the mentee side, that their mentees are being supported in that relationship, right? And that we have a way to sort of keep a pulse on that.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Sean.
And maybe in connecting them to outside organizations, like Natalie mentioned, obviously Informs, Military and Security Society, MORS. Where can we recommend that our the mentee also engage? So it's not necessarily, I guess what I'm trying to say is encouraging the mentees to find those trusted mentor organizations or organizations that could provide mentors that can be trusted in their fields as well, because some people just don't know where to go and where to start, right? Harrison, you get the...
Sure. A couple things on how to get started. You know, someone who grew into being a very important mentor in my life is someone that I met just sitting next to at a talk at an Informs conference, and just said, hey, this is kind of a cool topic. And then we started talking about Twitter, and when I retired from the Navy, my first phone call was to him, not to look for a job, but to look for advice. So I would say that if you're looking for someone to do mentorship for you, so you should cast a wide net. And what makes a good mentor for one person could be an awful mentor for someone else. This is a very informal, ad hoc thing that just happens, but it's also a defining characteristic of a professional. I can tell you right now that if you send me a LinkedIn note saying, hey, I trolled your I trolled your profile on LinkedIn and I'm trying to get 1,000 contacts, would you be my friend? Meh. If you send me a note that says, hey, I saw this piece you guys just published, I'd like to ask you some questions about it. Yeah. If you send me a note that says, hey, we were in this mentorship seminar together, could we talk further? You're going to get a let's talk from me. So that sort of engagement, particularly a first engagement, is what they call an informal interview or an informational interview. I'll tell you right now, there is no such thing. If someone is going to carve out half an hour of their day to talk to you, then there's interest there, and you should treat that as though it is a serious engagement for a first time. At the end of that interview, the person who's looking for mentorship or advice needs to send the mentor an email within probably an hour saying, thank you for your time. This is what you said you were going to do for me. This is what I said I was going to take as homework, and we're going to meet again at some period because the mentors are busy and we just simply won't do it.
That's great, great advice, Harrison. Thank you very much for that. And I know, I want to turn it back over to Shannon and get some opinions from you. And you know, we obviously. I'm a retired, I didn't mention it in the intro, but I'm a retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel just from a couple years ago, retiring. Harrison Schramm just a couple years before me, retired Navy officer, and Brian just coming off of active duty, retiring from the Navy last summer, if I remember that correctly. And Shannon, I know not active duty military, married into the military. I really welcome your thoughts on that. And as you think about that, and before I hand over the reins, one thing along that made me think while you were talking, Harrison, as I was transitioning from active duty, it was the American Corporate Partnership that has a year-long mentorship program that they offer to veterans for free. And they connected me with someone who was in the private sector, in industry, not in the military and national security space. And this person was the head of data analytics for their company. And we scheduled monthly hour-long meetings and with very focused conversations. What are the goals that you're trying to achieve in your transition from active duty? And it was wonderful to have that outside the organization advice, recommendation, trusted advisor who, knowing like Brian, as you were talking about, they weren't a direct influencer. I just knew that they were a trusted source to offer that kind of career progression goals, and that was extremely helpful. And I'd be interested from a non-military perspective, hearing from Shannon on some of those mentoring relationships.
Sure, yeah, I have so many thoughts. This is a great conversation. So, like, I know as far as the mentorship relationships I've had, I think some have been within the company I was working for and some have been outside. So I think I've had a combination of both. They've all been extremely beneficial, which is why I wanted to be the staff chair at JDSAT to set up the program. And I still get down to what's like, I think that the most important thing is either for the organization or the person is what's your objective? Like, what do you need to get out of the relationship, and talking about that, being aware of that, and being forthcoming with that. And the reason I say that applies to the military piece is like, we have an organization where we have a lot of fantastic veterans, retired veterans with us, and they have a really great wealth of military knowledge. And so there's one like pipeline of mentorship that we have really already set up in our company, is to inform our younger analysts that are coming, in most cases out of undergrad or maybe out of a master's program, trying to help them understand the military environment, culture, language. So that's like a whole training pipeline, which is mentorship in a way. But we're also at JDSAT trying to find ways to build mentorship, whether it's career development or personal development or establishing family life balance, like whatever that objective is, we're trying to establish that at JDSAT. So yeah, so I think, again, I guess to me, it really, whether it's like whether you're getting out of the military and you're seeking the transition of mentorship, or whether you're in the civilian sector and you're looking for personal development or professional development, I think it's all based on what are you trying to get out of it, and what is your audience, your group of mentees, what do they need to get out of it? So for example, at JDSAT, I think that in many cases, we are going to be able to satisfy the needs of the mentees with our current senior staff. And I totally agree with not mixing the subordinate relationships. But I think in some cases, we're going to have to go outside for sure, because I think that some of the needs won't be addressed by who we have in staff. So.
No, great. Yeah, that's great, Shannon. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
We are coming up at the end of the hour. I want to be mindful of people's times, and we can go a little long, but I want to at least before we do end with a please. First, thank you so much, Brian Morgan, for being our presenter today, and I want to thank the panelists, Shannon, Dan, Harrison, for joining us in the discussion. There have been some great conversations in chat, and Luke mentioned that he's currently in that American Corporate Partnership mentorship program, and it's been a great program for him, and that he certainly recommends that to others. And I know Natalie had some comments, so before we hit the hour, I'd like to turn the floor back over to Natalie to see if you have any closing comments, and then we can probably continue the conversation as people have time, but I want to be mindful that they might not as well.
Sure. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, whether you are live or you're watching us on YouTube after the fact. I really appreciate this. I hope you found something beneficial from it. If you have follow-up questions, our email addresses are on the screen, so you're welcome to you're welcome to contact us directly or join the conversation on our social media accounts as well. If you have ideas for follow-up webinars, or maybe even part 2 of this discussion, if you think we can have that, please also let us know, and we'll do our best to accommodate that. But again, thanks for joining, and I hope you found this beneficial for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Natalie. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And but I would like to encourage everyone, if you're able to stick around, if you do have some questions, I'm happy to take folks off mute, make sure that you can participate.